Hello everyone, I'm Randall Mendenhall alongside Joe Bricko on location at the Range Systems Studio. Hey, before we begin, I've got some trivia for you. Check it out. Hello again everyone, I'm Randall Mendenhall alongside Joe Bricko. We're here on location at the Range Systems Studio. I'd like to share with you the game plan for today. The webinar should last about 30 to 35 minutes, give or take, and then we'll have a question and answer session right after our content. So to see the questions here, or to ask a question rather, there's no need to wait until the Q&A to ask it. You can simply click on the triangle here next to the question section, type in your question in the text box, and then click on the paper airplane to send. Also, our slides are available for download, and to get that, just go to the handout section. You'll see the PDF link there. Click on that, and you'll be able to download the PDF. Lastly, our next webinar is Thursday, September 14th. Problems with rubber bullet traps, granular, and rubber. Our featured speaker today is Joe Bricko, Commercial Sales Representative at Range Systems. Joe works with many of our commercial range customers and brings years of construction experience to the table. Joe's topic today is new versus existing building, which is better? Joe, thanks for joining today.
Randall, thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for joining. We hope that we give you all some valuable takeaways here, and everybody can learn a thing or two.
All right, so that is the common question we receive: new versus existing building, which is better?
Well, it's all about location. So chances are you've heard the term, the three most important decisions that you'll make in the early stages is location, location, location. And this really couldn't be any more true. And it really is the driver when you're deciding which is better, new or existing building. It's all about that location. So to answer that question, we can't really answer that for you. All we can do is give you the pros and cons to help you with that decision, which is specific to your area. So again, all about location. So highly sought after locations, they're going to be in or near high population densities with good exposure. It's really important to have good exposure and really good traffic numbers. So because of this, typically these areas already built or taken because they are near the population densities, so they're built on. So it's usually harder to find raw land in these primo areas, so it is easier to find an existing building is what we're finding. You're looking for excellent customer demographics. Demographics is going to come up a lot, that term. So just to start, so everybody understands what the definition of demographics is, Randall.
Yeah, what is it?
So demographics is the number and the characteristics of people that live in a particular area. Okay. So it's the study of the group of people that are in that area. Now the key data within demographics is going to be the average age. It's very, very important. Certain age groups have have more tendencies to shoot or buy guns. So there is data on that. And then income levels and what they like to spend their money on. Obviously the goal is to make a profit. So you really want to know what your group of demographics is spending their money on.
Yeah, that's very important.
Yep. So we are gonna talk about that a bit. With raw land, you have more choice. So that that would tend to the side of being a pro for raw land.
All right, well, let's jump in then. So with an existing building, what would you say some of the pros are?
So the pro of an existing building, primo location, again, back to location, more available. An existing building versus raw land, again, because you're looking for those areas with good demographics, and it's in a highly populated area. So typically you're gonna have more options available. More likely to find the ideal demographics. Again, your target market is more apt to be in an area where there is an existing space. And you're trying to meet the criteria and create a favorable business model. So this is where you really want to have a business plan put together, understand what it's going to take for you to be profitable based on your mix of product, the number of lanes you want, the type of range you want to build, just your overall business plan. And once you understand that, you can start taking your demographics and looking for that location. Okay, so it's very important that the area that you select does meet your business model and your business plan.
It's key to find that intersection, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The best advice I could give is start to put together your business plan before you look for that location. So
that's good.
Absolutely. Okay. Other pros to the existing building. A lot of times you can find a motivated seller. Always seems to be some bank-owned properties.
Okay.
Sometimes you can get into some places for really a steal, and then you're way ahead of the game there. A lot of times with the existing building, you can get into lease agreements. With a new build, you're going to have to come up with some with a pretty big down payment. When you're talking about an existing space, you can get in a lease agreement, and with lease agreements, a lot of times you can work with the building owner. You can negotiate maybe 6 months rent-free. Allows you to start making some profits and paying for it that way. And a lot of times the owner will build the suit, so he can help you fund some of the build out, which is nice. So in this case, I'd recommend hiring a good attorney that has a lot of experience in working lease agreements. Make sure they're working through all the different angles, things like the terms of the lease, looking at the property, make sure there's nothing majorly wrong. Get a building inspector in there, make sure that it's suitable for what you're trying to do there. So
I think that's a great point, especially with the lease agreement. If you can start off with 6 months free or something like that, I mean, that's a boon for business right away.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're comparing, the raw land build versus that lease agreement, with the new build, you're gonna have to come up with some cash, so some initial cash right away. If you get into a lease agreement where you're in that space, maybe rent free for the first 6 months, really big difference there. So
awesome, good point, very good point.
Okay, so some examples of some ideal building types for building a range within an existing building. So we've had some experience here at Range Systems of building in bowling alleys, and those seem to work well. They're the right shape. It's a rectangle. It's basically what you want for a shooting range. So typically they have the space. The other nice part about bowling alleys is they're usually clear span, so you don't have columns in the way. You're not going to have your load-bearing walls that you have to deal with. It's a wide open space, so it does seem to be a good fit. and they seem to be available for whatever reason. Probably heard a lot of people say the shooting ranges are the old bowling alleys of the past. So
yeah, I have heard that. The shooting range is the new bowling alley.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So
any other building types that make a good for an existing building?
We've seen a movie theater built. We've done one of those, and that worked out well. Again, it's the right kind of space. It's free span and long and skinny, so it's the right fit for a build out.
Excellent points. So what would you say would be some of the cons of an existing building? We talked about the pros. What would some of the cons be then?
Well, the cons, definitely you're stuck with that, with whatever structure is there. Obviously, it's existing. So one of the biggest hurdles that we see is the ceilings being too low. We'll get into this more once we look at a sample plan of one of our ranges, but we're really looking for a 14-foot minimum clear span height. So I get calls all the time where people are excited about a building they found, and the first thing I said is, well, how tall is your ceilings in there? Oh, it's like 8 or 9 foot. Well, that's going to be a real challenge, and again, we'll get into that a little bit later. Another thing that we see is support columns. So it's something that is obviously in the way of your range. You really want to have an open range space. We do have solutions for that, but it is something we see as a con. The other thing is the ceiling structure. Even when it is tall enough at that 14 feet, what we like to see, there's just not enough remaining capacity in those trusses or bar joists or whatever the ceiling is, because it just wasn't designed for extra future things. Typically buildings are always built with cost in mind, and they try to do it the most cost-effective way. So there's usually not extra capacity in the ceiling structure. So for this, you end up getting into some engineering work and trying to find creative ways to increase the capacity of that. So.
And so we are able to sometimes strengthen those ceiling structures, correct?
Yep. So I can help you work through that, and typically you'd have an engineer or a general contractor that has an engineering department that can look at that and help you determine what needs to be added there. And then we also have another solution if it just isn't economically feasible to increase the strength of those of the ceiling, the bar joist, or the truss. And we've had this happen. I have multiple examples where I was able to save the budget by going to what we call a bridging baffle. So I've had multiple customers that have got into a space. They looked at the engineering costs and what it would take to basically put in a new roof system, and it blew the budget. So there, what we've done is our bridging baffle. So real quick, what a bridging baffle is a baffle that we produce here at Range System, unique to us, and we'll design a baffle that'll just bridge from sidewall to sidewall. So when you do your build out of your range space, you're going to put in poured concrete walls or CMU walls, cinder block walls, and we can design a baffle that just bridges across and is independent of the ceiling structure. So it's not a deal breaker if you get into a space where the ceiling isn't going to be able to handle hanging armor plated steel and all that extra weight, because we can design a bridging baffle. So it is a good solution. So we do have solutions to a lot of these cons of an existing building, but it is something you have to deal with nonetheless.
All right, so switching over to a new building then, what would you say are some of the pros of a new building?
The pros is get your exact design and layout. So within your business plan, you're gonna plan out your space. You're gonna have the right flow within, and you can control all that. So with the existing building, a lot of times you get what you get. You gotta make do with what you have. So traffic flow is very important. Everyone's probably heard that before. New building, it's gonna be fresh and clean. You're more apt to create a really attractive, high-end space, so people are more apt to come back. So that's a definite pro to that being new. Multi-use capabilities. So in case the range doesn't work out, you have a bit of a fallback. You can build these buildings as a multi-use. One of our clients here does that with every new build that he builds. So he thinks about alternative ways that building could be used, just in case he gets out of the business or something doesn't work. At least that space can be used for something else, so you're not dead in the water there. And then ample parking. This seems to be a problem with the existing buildings. A lot of times there isn't ample parking, and that can really
it can affect the customer experience.
Yeah, it sure can. You want to make sure you have enough parking.
Yeah. And here we have so much parking available. We're parked right there on the range.
Yeah, so that was a unique situation where we actually built an entrance door that you could actually bring a training car in. So that is something we can do. That's a good picture.
Okay, so moving on, we've discussed the pros. What might some of the cons be of a new building?
Okay, so cons of a new building. It's not going to be a lease deal, so you're going to be fronting that upfront cash. That can be pretty significant. So there is a big upfront capital investment. So you really have to you got to plan right. You got to have a big enough loan or enough saved up money to be able to do that. So it's really important that you look at your budget and make sure that you can pull that off. And then it's a longer construction process to open the range. Obviously, there's no building there, so you gotta start from ground level. A lot of times this would require rezoning, which can be a very lengthy process with the city. Average rezoning time to go through the whole process is typically 6 months, and it does vary a little bit. So if it's not zoned properly, that's first step. A lot of times you get into environmental studies, and this can be a bit sticky. So that's something you got to account for. That takes time. It's clearly something that would already be done if you bought an existing building. The zoning, you wouldn't look for a building that's not zoned in the right area. So the zoning is going to be done. The environmental study is going to be done. You look at your mechanicals, so water lines, sewer and waste. You've got to work through that whole process. That has to be planned in. That takes time. That's an expense. Takes some engineering. That's going to be done in existing building. Mechanicals, you have to look at what's available as far as natural gas, propane. Natural gas is going to be a better source for your ventilation, specifically your range ventilation. Certain areas you're only going to be able to get propane, so that's going to be something you have to work through. So those are definitely some cons of building a new building. So basically cash, duration to get open, and then just things you need to work through at the city level.
And we've got a picture there with a zoning application. You're familiar with that, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't think it'd be $5 though. So.
All right. So let's talk about some of the pitfalls then, Joe. What would be some of the mistakes that people make with existing buildings when they go in? What pitfalls should they try to avoid?
Okay, so the space, we touched on this a little bit already. The space has to work for what you're trying to do. We're range equipment providers, so I'm always thinking about the range box or the range shell. What do I have to build in? So a typical process when someone comes to us and needs help with designing, or they want pricing for their range, we design our equipment package within a provided space. So I'm looking at that range box. Number one question again is what are your ceiling heights? If they're too low, it's really challenging. You need enough room for our baffles. Typically have a 2-foot drop. You want the bottom of the baffle at 8 feet. and then depending on what type of ventilation you go with, you need some room above the baffle. That's why we're always saying get to 14 feet. Start there. If you have 14 feet, you're good. Anything lower than that, we can work with it. We do have some solutions, but 14 feet is ideal. And then structurally inadequate for the equipment is another big challenge. So.
All right, and then we also have size of the box to take into account too. So we've got the length. Sometimes some people they're not quite clear on what exactly is required. So what would be required on a typical range?
Yeah, it's a very important thing to understand. I get this weekly, basically. Someone wants to build a 25-yard, 75-foot range. It's the most common range we build. And they come to me and they tell me they have a 75-foot space. And then I have to break it to them that that's not going to work. So to get to a 75-foot target distance, you'll need a minimum of 105 feet. So we're looking for a length of 105 foot clear to get yourself to that 25-yard range. And how we arrive at
that. How does that break down?
So you need a 12-foot buffer, or a 12-foot area, I should say, from the back wall or entrance wall of the range to where the shooter actually stands. And this is a ventilation requirement. Just so you could get to the necessary ventilation, which is called a laminar flow. You need 12 feet of space there. And then you get to your target distance, which is, in this example, 75 feet. So you're adding the 12, you add the 75, and then you have to count for the footprint of the bullet trap. In this case, we're using a granular rubber trap, and it has a 15-foot footprint. And then a maintenance area. This is an option. Grand traps can go tight to the back wall, or you can have space behind them. It's really a luxury. If you have the room, we recommend that 3 feet behind, but you add all those up and you get to 105 feet. So it's really important that you understand that and make sure you're getting into a space that has that available.
Yeah, that maintenance, that 3 feet, that extra 3 feet, that can really come in handy and be a nice feature there. All right, well, we just kind of looked at some of the minimums and kind of recommendations. How does that look like then in an example range? Here we have a range drawing.
Yeah, so this would be a great example, really a picture of what I just described. This is an 8-lane range. Okay, you're going to have your 25-yard target distance, so your 75-foot range. Again, the most common. So moving from right to left, so moving from the fixed line of fire down to the bullet trap, you can see we have 12 feet to the fixed line of fire. So that's where the shooter actually stands. Again, that's a ventilation requirement to be 12 feet forward. Now above the shooter at that 12-foot line, you can see we have a horizontal ceiling. So we call that a safety ceiling. It's going to protect against any errant rounds overhead. Then moving down range, we have 6 baffles. So that those 6 baffles in the 25-yard range is going to create a no blue sky. So from that fixed line of fire, no matter what kind of errant round or accidental round happens overhead, it's going to be safely stopped within the baffles or the safety ceiling. So, and then beyond the baffles, you have the granular rubber trap. You see there it's 14 foot 11. We call it 15 feet round up there, just to make sure you have enough room. So.
And there is a maintenance area too behind there, isn't there?
No, this example is right tight to the back wall.
Yep.
So this particular customer would be doing all the maintenance from the front side. So it's probably a case where they were trying to maximize their retail space, and this is a bit of a trade-off. So that's something you'll have to decide on. They go either way. Again, the area behind the trap, it's just for convenience. It makes for a nice storage area, and it's easier to add extra granular or maintain your hopper, the granular trap from behind. So that's a personal decision on that, but can go either way.
All right. Anything else you want to illustrate here on the example range?
Yeah, again, ceiling heights, critically important to make sure you do have enough ceiling height. In this case, we have 14-foot 7-inch clear, which is ideal. You can see that we have enough space above the baffles there, and this makes our ventilation folks real happy.
Real happy. All right, so moving on. What are some of the common pitfalls or mistakes that people make when it comes to new buildings then?
New buildings. The big one is scope creep. So I've been involved in building structures for going on 20 years now, so I've been around this quite a bit, and it's such a common thing. You set a budget, you put your plan together, you get into building the building, and you start having things that you just think you can't live without, and it's extra adds. So scope creep is a real thing. Because of this, I always recommend putting in a 20% contingency plan in the building costs, because there's always going to be some unforeseens. There's going to be things that you want to add. You're kind of learning, along the way, and you're finding nice little features and things that you think will create a more attractive spot for you, or a more attractive building that you want to add. So make sure you allow at least a little bit extra. I always say 20% if you can. Settling on raw land that the traffic and demographics don't support. Again, it's all about putting together a business plan, having your business model, and just being honest about what it's going to take to make your business work, and make sure that location supports it. I see a lot of times people fall in love with some raw land, and they just overlook some critical things. Basically, their formula doesn't work. You get in, you build it, you don't have the traffic flow you need. Demographics aren't quite right. It's too far off the beaten path, so you end up having to make up in more marketing, efforts. So that's an extra cost just to try to get people within your store. So definitely make sure that your location supports your business plan, your business model.
And then lastly, we've got accessibility from highways. People do want to get in and out easily, don't they?
It's a big thing. Again, the location.
Yep. And speaking of accessibility, we've got a small example here. This is it's not a shooting range, but it's a big box retailer, and this is an actual map from the city, and we'll keep it anonymous. But here you can see we've got the interstate, and this is a reasonably flat area, so you can see here's the location of a big box retailer. Describe the path that someone needs to take to get to that location when they're coming from this, Joe.
Yeah, it's something I do all the time, actually. I spend a lot of time up in that area, and it's a retailer that I rely on for a lot of the stuff I buy, and I often have intentions on going in there, and if I'm a little bit pressed for time, I don't, just because of how complicated it is to get in there. So basically, you have to pass up the location, okay? You have to get all the way to that off ramp, and the thing about that off ramp is there's actually a city bypass.
And you can see that right there.
Yep. So you have to make a left or a right, and if you make the wrong turn, you end up on the bypass, and you end up a couple miles north of town before you can even turn around. So that right there is super complicated. I'm sure they get a ton of fall off with people just making the wrong turn. But even if you select the right turn, you got to make several turns to even get in there. You got to completely backtrack.
The complete opposite direction right here.
Yep. So anybody that's done it a few times, they know that it's kind of a headache, and I do it myself. I want to go in there, and I don't, just because it's tough to get into. So it's an important thing to make sure that you're easily accessible.
Well, and if we take a look at the zoning there, you can see that it's that giant salmon-colored area, and it was zoned that way too. So that was by design from the city, and that's where they ended up. Importance of location, very, very key. All right, well, let's talk about some of the additional resources that can help people out here who are on the webinar. What would you recommend for some additional resources, Joe?
The NSSF is just an awesome resource. It's one of the first recommendations I make. There's so much stuff on there. A lot of the stuff is at no cost. I mean, you can do the bulk of your research just through this website. The one that we're highlighting here is a customized market report. It's a great thing. You can see the link there, direct link. So be sure to check that out. Other helpful things, sample business plans, business plan templates, samples of profit and loss statements. I recommend looking through there. There might be some expenses that you're not even taking into consideration. Again, your business plan has to work. It's all about that. It's all about that model. And then links to experienced consultants. This is an awesome thing to take advantage of. We have some folks that we've utilized here before. I mean, these guys are truly experts. They own ranges themselves. They have a ton of experience. Take it from someone that's done this before, and truthfully, in the big picture, it's not that large of an investment. The NSSF and the NRA do have some programs to help fund this, so be certain to look into that. My information will be at the end of the slide deck here, and if you have some interest in hiring any of the guys that are recommended, give me a call. I'll make an introduction. I'll get you lined up with these guys. But you know, they do a great job, and again, they've been through it. So take the learning curve out of it and let them help you.
Yeah, and these consultants are they are on the NSSF, so
correct.
They went through that process and they're endorsed by them.
Absolutely. And then we have a newly designed range guide. A lot of folks have found this to be real helpful. It's not a real long read. Kind of hits all the key points. So send me an email, shoot me a call. Be happy to send you a digital copy of the Range Systems range design guide.
Great resources there. So let's talk about some of our key customer takeaways then. As far as our webinar today goes, what would you say are some of the good takeaways for our customers?
One of the big takeaways, make sure you engage with the shooting range provider early on in the process. Even if it is in Range Systems, get a hold of your preferred provider. Too often I get calls where people have already engaged with an architect, and understand there's not a whole lot of architects that actually have range experience, so they're learning on the fly a little bit too. So a lot of times you got the cart in front of the horse, which is a problem. And then I gotta let the architect know that he just spent the last few weeks designing a space that isn't adequate for what the client wants, because again, the ceilings are too low, don't have enough length or width to work for what they want. So make sure you engage with your provider early on in the process. And again, we kind of beat this to death a little bit, but location. It's all about that location. Make sure you're selecting a favorable location. Again, make sure you have a solid business plan, and you know, there's resources to help you with the business plan. With that, does your location, does the demographics of the location support the size of your business model? And that'll all be figured out within your plan. Speed versus comfort. Now, speed is going to be your existing building. Okay, if you get into that, you're going to get up and running quicker. I have a lot of cases where people have opened the doors within a few months. That can't happen with the new building. So comfort, that's going to be associated with the new building. Okay, you can build it how you want. You can plan your layout, but it is going to take longer. I'd say on average we're seeing, you know, I'd say about a year from when I first get a call to those people, to when those people open the door. You should plan on a year, sometimes longer. Again, if you have to go through rezoning, you know, it can be a 6-month process alone. So it's really about deciding on speed versus comfort, and what's best for you.
Awesome takeaways there. Hey, just a reminder, If you have a question that you'd like to ask today, go ahead and click on the triangle next to the questions section, type your question into the text box, and then click on that paper airplane send button, and that will submit your question. So let's jump into Q&A here. We've got our first question from David. David's asking kind of a high-level question. What percentage of commercial ranges are built new versus existing building? What do you see, Joe?
I'd say it's a pretty even mix. If I'm thinking back through the commercial ranges I've sold, in the past 5 years, I'd say it's a pretty even mix.
Awesome. All right. Next question's from Tyler. Tyler asks, what should I look for when approaching a range consultant? Then he's got in parentheses, like you mentioned, we could find on the NSSF website. So what are some things when you first approach that range consultant, what should you look for?
Well, to find them, first off, there's going to be recommended range consultants on the NSSF page. And you can come to me again, and I'll help you make that connection to some folks that I know are really, really good and had a lot of success in helping people. But the things you should look for is their experience. What have they done before? Have they been range owners themselves? What type of menu of services do they offer?
That's good. Yeah. What kind of menu of services do they offer? So it sounds like there's some variability with the offering between some of these consultants.
Yeah. The ideal one is going to have some range experience. You get a second opinion on your ballistic equipment, which is always good to have multiple opinions. They're going to be well versed in retail, so they can help you with your layouts. They can help you out with your point of sale. That's a big thing. The point of sale, sourcing equipment. They can help you with this. Obviously you got to have product to sell. So that's a big one. A lot of them are well versed in all the legal aspects of the range, all the setups with that. So really having that well-rounded menu of services is what I would personally be looking for. Not just a range equipment expert, not just a retail expert, but a guy that can do all of that. Has experience with writing business plans, can help you with your demographic study. Again, that demographic study is going to be the driver for selecting your location.
Okay, Daniel asks, what are some good examples of some ranges that have been done right?
Okay, well this could go a ton of different directions. Done right is a little bit vague. But I'd be happy to send Daniel some examples of some ranges. The example that we had in the slide deck, I'd say is done right. You have adequate ceiling heights. You have that 105-foot length to accommodate the 25-yard target distance. So really, to answer the question on being done right or not, it really comes down to that space. For us, we're confident with our ballistic component packages. Outside of that, I've seen some ranges that aren't done right. Some do-it-yourselfers put in some baffles, and they got openings in between. You can shoot out of the building. That'd be an example of not being done right, just not having the right ballistic layout. So, but again, Daniel, happy to send you some sample range drawings and help you through that.
Awesome. Next question is from Eric. Eric asks, any experience building in an old Walmart, particularly roof support issues? Well, that's kind of a unique one.
Yeah, that is a unique question. We actually have a customer now that's looking at an old Walmart. I haven't got into the structural part of it yet and understanding what type of roof system they have in there, but I could, with confidence, I could tell you that you would need some additional support. Walmart's going to put those buildings up as cost effectively as possible. they're not going to have a whole lot of remaining capacity within those bar joists. Certainly not a deal breaker. With the Walmart, obviously it's a nice big open space. With that, it's an ideal area. One of the pieces you have to look at though is adding some strength to the roof. Nice high ceilings in there, definitely 14 feet or higher, so that's a good fit there. So yeah, I'd say it's an ideal space. I'd be happy to take a look at it and work with your architect and let him know what he needs to do there. With that, you know, the first thing I'm going to do with an architect is give them our point load drawings. So that basically tells you the loads at each connection point for our baffles and our safety ceiling. And then they're able to take a look at that, the structure, the bar joist, the truss, and then see what needs to be done to be able to support that.
All right, next question's from Jeff. Jeff asks, OSHA, do you have any recommendations for a plan or consultant for OSHA?
As far as this goes, I would get Jeff in touch with one of the consultants that I mentioned. He's a range owner himself. He's been through all that. He's well versed in all of it. He's going to be your best resource there. So feel free to send me an email or give me a call, get you in touch with him.
All right, our next question's from Boyd. Boyd, he's asking, thinking of using precast concrete box culvert to contain a 25-yard one-lane home range. Okay, so we're switching over to home range topics. Mm-hmm. Have you seen this application anywhere? I'll ask that again. Thinking about using a precast concrete box culvert to contain a 25-yard one-lane home range. Have you seen that before?
Yeah, excellent question. Home ranges are super popular right now. It's a big percentage of what we're doing. I get a call weekly. I think we have 5 or 6 home ranges on the books right now. And as far as using the precast, it's an excellent choice in a home range. When you go with a concrete ceiling, you're creating a complete ballistic box, so you're going to save on some baffles. In the case of a precast concrete ceiling, we're using a light guard instead of a full-blown baffle to create your overhead protection, because with the precast, you're essentially creating the ballistic ceiling, so you can save on baffle cost. And the big thing there is sound. When you put yourself into a sealed up concrete box, it's very soundproof. So it's a great way. I mean, if you can pull it off, you can work it into your plan, and you're able to get that span crate into your space, definitely the way I recommend. I mean, it's the ultimate way to go for a home range.
Awesome, great question there. Next, Timothy, he's talking about ventilation. So Timothy asks, states, everything I have read on ventilation says slight negative pressure. What are the actual numbers needed for proper ventilation? That's a very specific question, Timothy. What do you say to that, Joe?
Yeah, and this is where I would just lean on our ventilation experts. That's what these guys do. They do it very well. I could answer that at a high level and tell you, yes, you do need a negative pressure. That is a requirement. Those exact numbers, I'd leave that up to the experts. So feel free to send me an email. I'll get you in touch with our ventilation people, and they'll answer every question you have.
All right, so we've got our final question here from Daniel. Daniel's looking to the future already. He asked, what is the big deal about rubber versus metal traps? And I think our next month's webinar is going to be problems with rubber traps. So what would you say to that, the big deal about rubber versus metal traps from a very high level?
A real high level, and we could get, I mean, I could spend an hour talking about this. The big thing there is the upfront costs. So it seems that everybody seems to be on a tight budget, and your granular rubber traps are going to be about 1/4 of the price. So usually I don't have to get into talking about the differences a whole lot, and there's a lot of differences. There's pros and cons to both. But if you're looking at it from a budget standpoint, steel traps are very expensive. They also require more space. So it's usually right there's the biggies. But if you want to discuss those in detail, feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and we can get deep in the weeds on the differences.
All right, it looks like that is all the questions that have been submitted. Just a reminder, I know Joe's mentioned this a couple of times, but his information is up on the screen. If you'd like to email him, joeb@range-systems.com, or his phone number is up there as well. And on the topic of rubber bullet traps, our next webinar is Thursday, September 14th, and the topic is problems with rubber bullet traps, both granular and block. Joe, thanks for presenting, and thank you to everybody who attended. That's all for today.
That's it. Thank you for joining us.